Hey there, friends. It is time for lunchtime true crime. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. So listen, today we are doing Betty Broderick Snapped. You know Betty, right? Betty was actually one of my very first true crimes, and she's kind of my favorite. So I didn't even have to watch the whole episode to know what the deal was with Betty. A couple years ago, one of these channels, Hulu, Lifetime, whoever, made a movie with Christian Slater all about Miss Betty, but her story is simple and easy. Listen. Betty was a very traditional girl. All she wanted to do was go to college to meet a nice man so she could stay home and be a housefrau, right? She was going to cook and she was going to bake and she was going to be the perfect housewife and everything was going to work out perfectly as she decided perfect was. Well, that is not what happened. Dan went to law school and Betty scrimped and saved and paid the bills and had the baby, 4 kids. Had the kids, took care of the kids, did everything, and let Dan study. When he finished law school, he went to medical school. Or did he go to medical school and then law school? Unclear. Doesn't even matter. Dan was super, super smart. And then he got a job at a high-powered law firm. So Betty was like, oh, look at me. Listen, I am Mrs. Broderick. You know the type. These ladies are old school now, but back in the day, oh, you were Mrs. your husband's name. And Betty was all about being Mrs. Dan Broderick. But here's the thing. Now that Dan was an up-and-comer, he was looking at his wife like, she a little thick around the middle. And look at that. She's looking a little old and a little wrinkly. You know what I need? I need a cute young model. So he had a secretary, Linda something or other. And so, of course, he was diddling the secretary like they do. And Betty found out about it. And she was like, oh, no. No, what this heifer's not going to do is come in here and take my husband away from me because I am the perfect Mrs. Broderick. Well, Dan and Linda had other ideas. So finally, the final straw for that marriage is one day Betty got herself all pretty, packed a picnic basket, cake, champagne, and showed up at the office to surprise Dan, only to discover Dan had gone out to lunch with his secretary, Linda, and they never came back. Betty was livid and she was like, I'm gonna get a divorce, but I'm gonna punish you the entire time I'm getting this divorce because divorce is there to punish a wayward husband in Betty's mind. So Betty files for a divorce and then she's like, I want the kids, I want the house, I want spousal support, I want everything. And he was like, whatever, girl, take what you need. Everything he asked for, she wanted a fight. He had called around to all the good lawyers in town to inquire with them like, oh, will you handle my divorce case? Oh, no, you want? Okay, never mind. The reason that's bad is that once Dan has spoken to them, Betty can't use them. So she was like, wait, he knows all the lawyers. He knows all the judges. I'm about to get screwed. So every time the kids came to visit, she would make demands. She was kind of a nightmare. Yes, she had been done wrong. No question about that. But she went above and beyond to make Dan's life miserable. But Dan was like, I am not even worried about this heifer. So Dan and Linda moved in together. Well, now he has this cute young thing who looks almost exactly like Betty had looked 20, 30 years on. Betty is home with these 4 little kids, wiping noses and trying to pay bills. And here's Dan off in the Turks and Caicos and living his best life. Well, Betty was having none of that. So she was like, oh, you want to be a father? Take these kids. Dropped all 4 kids off at his house. And was like, you raised the kids. Dan was like, great, I'm filing for full custody. And she was like, wait now. Started leaving crazy messages on his answering machine. Now, by this point, some of the kids were good and grown, 17, 18, 19. They had 2 girls, 2 boys. The 2 girls were very good and grown. The 2 boys were still pretty young. So, Betty's calling, leaving scandalous messages on Dan's machine, calling him and Linda everything but a child of God. In her mind, only Dan and Linda were going to hear these messages. Turns out, back in the day, if you had an answering machine, somebody called your house, the tape picked up. Yes, child, it was a tape. We old. And you could hear the message play inside the house. Well, listen. The kids are hearing these messages. The kids are upset. And Dan was like, no, what you're not going to do is upset my children. Because yes, even though this situation has driven you crazy, I'm going to rise above. Every time Betty went low, Dan went higher and stomped on her neck. Was he a good guy? No, not at all. But he knew how to work the legal system and he was terrible in a very smart way. He was like, okay, Bets, every time you leave a nasty message, I'm going to deduct some money from your spousal support. She left so many. She was like, no, you're not. She left so many messages that at a point she was getting like nickels and dimes. And so she was like, well, how am I supposed to pay for my mansion and my fancy car? He was like, well, you're going to have to stop acting crazy. And she was like, I will not stop acting crazy. So Dan was like, okay, no problem. This divorce has wound on for years and I want to marry my cute secretary. So I'm going to get a bifurcated divorce. That's when you get divorced legally and figure out the money later. Betty didn't even know that was a thing because, you know, she had that cheap ass lawyer because Dan had conflicted out all the good lawyers. So she was like, wait, I'm divorced? I was going to hold this over his head and then I was going to be fantastic and rich and make him pay. But that's not how that worked out. Betty is livid. She's driving her car up in his front yard. She's trying to crash the wedding because you know Dan and Linda got married. Oh, they went and got married. A beautiful ceremony. All the kids are living with them. The kids are happy. Everybody's happy. And Betty is sitting here with her whole behind out. So she finally says to her daughter, why don't you come and visit me and we can have a little chitty chat. The daughter goes to the house, spends the night. They have a very nice chat. And Betty steals her daughter's keys, goes over to Dan's house, takes a gun, and shoots and kills Dan and Linda in their bed. And because that was not enough, she takes the phone cord. This is when everybody had landlines, yanks the phone out of the wall so they can't call for help. And then she leaves. And then the po-po rolled up on her and they was like, Betty girl, what happened? And her daughter was like, Mom, you're not supposed to kill Dad. And Betty was like, oh, you know, he made me mad. So the whole case goes to court and everybody is Team Betty, right? All of the media, everybody was like, well, in the state of California today, Dan Broderick is dead, but Betty was done wrong. So what us gonna do? So everybody was Team Betty. But then in the court case, those phone messages started coming out. Child, they played message after message after message. And the entire country at once was like, wait, what? She said, what? And then one of the messages, you hear her son pick up the phone and say, Mom, please stop saying bad words. And she was like, your father is a blah, 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 blah. And everybody was like, oh, we not Team Betty. I'm going to take off this Team Betty t-shirt. We're going to sit this to the side and we're going to act like we don't know Miss Betty. So Betty gets convicted and she goes off to jail. That was in the 80s, maybe the 90s at the very latest. Child, Betty is still in prison. Betty is still in prison, raising hell. And she's just like, I just need to be free because no matter what happens, Dan and Linda are not coming back. Here's the thing, Betty, we know you were a good girl. We know you did all the right things, but you know what the right things don't get you? A good marriage, necessarily. They say you can't change a hoe into a housewife, but a hoe can change herself into a housewife. And a hoe is used to dealing with all kinds of madness, and she could just let it ride because a hoe sees the big picture. A nice girl is like, well, if I'm just nice, I will be nice and everything will work out good. Hoes know that ain't the case. Linda, was she a hoe? Oh, yes, she was. She was sleeping with her boss. She used it to get a promotion. She married the man. She was raising this man's kids. Yeah, that's hoe-like behavior. I'm not saying she was a hoe. I'm saying she had ways likened unto that of a hoe. But that is not a reason to kill this poor woman. So it's what, 30 years later now? Linda, still very dead. Dan, still very dead. The kids are grown. They got their own lives. You know who they don't talk to? They mama. They going over there to Dan and Linda's graves and they visiting them. Dan and Linda were only married for like 6 months. Betty Broderick got LWOP. That's right, friends. Life without the possibility of parole. So if you want to write Betty a letter, you can go and write her a letter over there in the whatever California Correctional Institute because she is still there. And you know what she is? Still mad. Still blaming Dan and Linda. It's like, Betty girl, if you take like a little bit of responsibility, nobody's going to be mad. Because meanwhile, all of us got out here. We got tiny cell phones. Back when you was out, they had the big giant ones. We got the internet. Do you even know what Wi-Fi is, girl? The whole world has moved on. Betty has not. So listen, I got to move on and get my behind to work because, you know, money, lights, electricity, heat. I need to get out here in the streets. In the meantime, you have a great day and I will talk to you soon. Bye.